Forget your local derby for a second. Forget City versus United, forget Real Madrid versus Barcelona, forget everything you think you know about football hatred, because what we're about to talk about isn't about two clubs from the same city, it's about two countries, two flags, two entire nations who, for 90 minutes, turn a football pitch into something that looks a lot more like a battlefield. If South America has a throne, these two nations have been fighting over it for more than a century. The first official meeting between Brazil and Argentina goes all the way back to 1914 in Buenos Aires, and Argentina won comfortably, 3-0. At that point, Argentina were already the dominant force on the continent. Brazil was still finding its feet. Nobody in that stadium could have known they were watching the opening chapter of what FIFA itself would later describe as the very essence of football rivalry. For decades, this wasn't really a rivalry between equals. Argentina had the early pedigree, but everything changed as Brazil's football culture exploded, and by the time the two nations met at a World Cup for the first time, in 1974, this had already become the biggest fixture in the Americas. Here's the thing that makes Brazil versus Argentina different from almost every other rivalry on this list. There's no war behind it, no colonial wound, no ethnic conflict. This is a rivalry built entirely on footballing pride. And honestly, that might be what makes it purer, and in some ways scarier. It's the eternal argument that never gets settled. Who's the greatest of all time, Pelé or Maradona? Now updated for a new generation, Messi or Neymar. Brazil's Joga Bonita, the beautiful game, against Argentina's La Nuestra, their own more combative, cunning style. And when Diego Maradona himself said in his autobiography that he liked Brazilians as people but wanted to beat them to death on the pitch, that pretty much tells you everything about how personal this gets, even without a shot being fired in anger. The numbers only add fuel to the fire. Over more than 110 official meetings, the two sides are almost dead level. Brazil holds the slightest historical edge, but we're talking about a handful of matches separating a full century of football. Brazil has 5 World Cups to Argentina's 3. Argentina has more Copa Americas. Every trophy cabinet becomes ammunition. What keeps it burning today? Simple. Every single generation produces a new greatest player alive argument, and it's always a Brazilian against an Argentine. As long as that keeps happening, this rivalry will never cool down. This one isn't just old. This is literally where international football began. On the 30th of November 1872, St. Andrew's Day, Scotland's national day, which is not a coincidence, Scotland and England lined up against each other at Hamilton Crescent in Glasgow. It ended 0-0. Roughly 4,000 people paid a shilling each to witness it, and FIFA officially recognizes this match as the very first international football fixture in the history of the sport. Think about that for a second. Every World Cup, every European Championship, every national anthem played before kickoff. It all traces its roots back to this single, scoreless afternoon in Glasgow. But this wasn't born out of friendship, it was born out of resentment. Before 1872, England and Scotland had played 5 so-called internationals in London, but Scotland's side was basically a fake. Almost every Scottish player selected was actually based in London. Scots up north were furious about it, so Glasgow's Queen's Park Club essentially said, "Enough, we're putting together a real Scottish national team on Scottish soil, with Scottish players." That match in 1872 was as much a statement of identity as it was a football game. This isn't about colonial history or war. It's older and in some ways deeper than that. It's about identity within the same island. Two nations bound together politically for centuries, who still find their national pride most vividly in beating the other at football. The rivalry only intensified once the fixture became part of the British Home Championship in the 1880s, turning it into an annual grudge match for over 40 straight years. Some rivalries are about football. This one is about history that goes far beyond the pitch. From 1910 to 1945, Korea was under brutal Japanese colonial rule, a 35-year occupation that involved forced labor, suppression of the Korean language, and wounds that, even today, have never fully healed in the collective memory of the Korean people. So when Korea and Japan first met in a Football World Cup qualifier in 1954, less than a decade after liberation, this was never going to be just a game. Korea's president at the time, Syngman Rhee, a man who had himself been imprisoned and tortured under Japanese rule, refused to even let the Japanese team set foot on Korean soil. Both legs had to be played in Japan instead. And according to accounts from the time, Rhee told the Korean squad that if they lost, they shouldn't bother coming home. They should throw themselves into the sea instead. Korea won the first leg 5-1, drew the second 2-2, and qualified for the World Cup. A rivalry and a legend was born in that single moment. Since then, every Korea-Japan match has carried a weight that has nothing to do with league position or world rankings. For Korean players, losing to Japan isn't just a bad result. It brushes up against something close to national dishonor. Japan, for its part, has grown into a genuine footballing power in Asia, which only sharpens the sense of rivalry on their side too. This is no longer a one-sided grudge, it's a fight between two serious footballing nations. What keeps this fire burning today isn't just old wounds, it's that those wounds never fully closed. Territorial disputes, disagreements over how history is taught in Japanese textbooks, and lingering resentment over the colonial period still surface in the media every time these two teams meet. Add to that the fact that both nations have become genuine footballing powerhouses in Asia, regularly battling for qualification spots and continental titles, and you get a fixture that's as loaded now as it was in 1954. This is, without exaggeration, one of the most politically dangerous rivalries in world sport, because it was literally forged inside the collapse of a nation. To understand it, you have to go back to May 13th, 1990 to Maksimir Stadium in Zagreb for a club match, Dinamo Zagreb against Red Star Belgrade, that never actually got played. Just weeks earlier, Croatia had held its first multi-party election since the end of communism, and nationalist tensions across Yugoslavia were already boiling. Roughly 2,000 to 3,000 Red Star fans, led by their notorious ultras group, the Dilige, whose leader would later become an infamous Serbian paramilitary commander, traveled to Zagreb. What followed was one of the most infamous riots in football history. Over 60 people injured, some stabbed, some shot, tear gas everywhere, and the game abandoned before a ball was properly kicked. In the middle of the chaos, Dinamo's captain, a 21-year-old named Zvonimir Boban, ran across the pitch and kicked a police officer who was beating a Croatian fan. That single image made Boban a national hero in Croatia overnight, and within a year, Yugoslavia was at war. Now, historians will tell you, accurately, that football didn't start the Yugoslav wars. The forces tearing the country apart were already in motion, but symbolically, that riot became the moment people point to as the beginning of the end. Outside Maksimir Stadium today, there's a monument dedicated to the Dinamo fans who went on to fight, and in many cases die, in Croatia's War of Independence. Out of that collapse, Serbia and Croatia became separate nations with separate national football teams, and every match between them since has carried the full weight of that history. Ethnic cleansing, sieges, tens of thousands of lives lost in a war that ended less than 3 decades ago. When these two national teams meet, it's not two neighbors playing football, it's two nations who fought each other, staring across the same pitch. What keeps it alive today? The wounds of the 1990s are still fresh in living memory for millions of people on both sides. Political tension between Belgrade and Zagreb never fully disappeared. Nationalist chanting in the stands still regularly makes headlines, and every fixture between these two is treated by both governments as something that needs careful security planning, because this was never really about football to begin with. If you want proof that football can spiral completely out of control, this is the ultimate case study. Algeria and Egypt, two of North Africa's biggest footballing nations, have a rivalry that stretches back decades. But it reached its boiling point during their fight to qualify for the 1990 and 2010 World Cups. In 1989, a decisive World Cup qualifier in Cairo, won by Egypt, ended in chaos on the pitch, with players clashing and Egypt's own team doctor partially blinded in the trouble. That bitterness never really went away. It just waited 20 years to explode again. Fast forward to November 2009. Egypt and Algeria were fighting for the same spot at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. Before the first leg in Cairo, the Algerian team bus was pelted with stones by Egyptian fans on its way from the airport. 3 players were injured, 1 goalkeeping coach was concussed by broken glass. FIFA later confirmed the incident and opened disciplinary proceedings against the Egyptian Federation. Egypt won that match 2-0, forcing a winner-takes-all playoff in neutral Sudan. Algeria won it 1-0 to seal their World Cup spot. And that's when things got genuinely frightening. Egyptian fans and buses were attacked in Khartoum. Back home, the fallout was even worse. In Algiers, Egyptian-owned businesses were ransacked, including offices of a major telecom company, which reported millions of dollars in damages. Egypt recalled its ambassador from Algeria. Algeria summoned Egypt's ambassador for a formal protest. Governments on both sides were now involved in what had started as a football match. This is one of the very few times in football history where a World Cup qualifier came close to triggering an actual diplomatic rupture between two nations. Embassies were attacked, national pride was on the line, and for a few tense days, football and geopolitics became almost indistinguishable. What keeps this rivalry so charged today? Simple. Algeria and Egypt are still one of the biggest footballing powers in North Africa, still competing for the same qualification spots, and neither country has ever really let go of what happened in 2009. Every time these two draw each other, that history resurfaces instantly. And there you have it. 5 rivalries that prove international football is so much more than 11 players chasing a ball. But if you thought Serbia versus Croatia sounded intense, wait until you see what happens on a weekly basis, at club level, in the Balkans. I've got an entire video on what might genuinely be the most dangerous derby on the planet, Red Star Belgrade versus Partizan Belgrade. Go check it out, it's linked right here, and I promise you it goes even darker than anything we covered today.